All right. Well, I just wanted to welcome everybody to the Boston Architect User Group. I'm really excited to have Diane Kesler present today. She's another woman who Mule and Mulesoft ambassador and very active in the Mulesoft community. So it's really cool to have her come over and present to our Salesforce community group.
Thank you so much, Melissa. It's a pleasure to be here. And what's really interesting is when hyperautomation came out, I guess about maybe a year ago, maybe. And I was really intrigued by it. I was totally on the MuleSoft side, no doubt, and was committed to be fully certified in all of the MuleSoft certifications, which I achieved, as well as, becoming, I was already an instructor, and my goal now is to teach all of the MuleSoft classes. I'm 3 away of completing all of the qualifications for all of the MuleSoft classes. But in that mix came about hyperautomation. And it really caught my attention because it crosses all of the platforms. MuleSoft, the Anypoint Platform, RPA, and then also Einstein, well, it jumped over into MuleSoft Composer, then Salesforce Flow, Salesforce Orchestration, and Einstein Chatbot. So I was like so intrigued. I took the class. I also committed to qualify to teach the class. And it turns out, as one of the instructors who reminds me that I was one of the first instructors to teach hyperautomation, not only in the Americas, but it was just like amazing that it was such an achievement. But to me, it was a passion, and it ran parallel with what's happening in our company, in our industry, where MuleSoft and Salesforce are coming closer and closer together, and those integrations just keep getting better and better. Because I remember when the hyperautomation class first came out, some of those integrations between Salesforce and MuleSoft were a little bit clunky, and even in the class itself, we had to turn around and do a lot of configurations and details like that. But now it's becoming more and more streamlined. So I always want to give a shout out to the teams behind the scenes that make those integrations much smoother. And that segues into what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about learning the Okta Dance, and when we talk about dancing, dancing, you got to kind of stay in step. It can be pretty complex at times, but at the same time, you want to have a good time with it. Well, Okta and securing our APIs can be a little bit crazy as far as the complexity of it. So yes, it is something that we do and create and configure, and you're going to see me go through it a little bit in a demo fashion. I'm not going to do absolutely all of the configurations manually, but you'll see the process to it. But why is this important? When we go to connecting with Salesforce, from MuleSoft to Salesforce, we have, let's see, I think I have it up. Yeah, the MuleSoft services. And the MuleSoft services from the Salesforce platform, this is very familiar to you all, I'm certain. But if you've never actually connected to MuleSoft from here, there's a login. And when you log in from MuleSoft services, it automatically creates the name credentials for the login, the external credentials, and the authorization, the permission group. And so, it makes that connection for the platform itself. But when I have an API that I want to also share that asset with Salesforce, the Salesforce platform, I have to create a external credential first that is the authentication protocol. Now I'm going to get real technical. Start off real fun, but now we're talking about authentication protocol, and we need a bearer token, and we need to do this and that. Well, what does that all mean? What does that all mean? It's many ways in which we can authenticate between platforms to make that integration happen. And, there's, again, as you see in the list, and this is, just kind of the things available by on the Salesforce platform. And one of them is OAuth 2.0. Okay, and so when we go into OAuth 2.0, there's numerous configurations that have to be done here. And of course, then once you have your name credential created, then you can go, or I'm sorry, your external credential created. Then we can go over to the name credentials and build out that relationship of bringing in a particular API. And that's what I'm going to secure tonight is one of my APIs. And this is an example from the hyperautomation class, FYI, of an API that we did that with. Okay, so it has the external credentials. In this case, it was basic OAuth or basic authorization, sorry. And so when we do this, the coolest thing about this is it brings in this asset. It brings in this asset that then can be used inside Salesforce flows and orchestration. And so it really brings a different dimension. I'm trying to see if I could get it to, show me the actual asset. Here we go. Okay, so here's the asset. Once we do that, so this is, like I said, one of the APIs that we bring in, and all of the endpoints and the functionality of this API are now available in Salesforce. It's just at this point in the class, it's like, this is so cool because not only do we have an asset on the Mulesoft side that's established as a system API in this case, and what we want to do is be able to streamline using that on the Salesforce platform. It creates the Apex object for it. And so as we are, like I said, again, interacting between the platforms, it just allows us to reuse some of the work that's already been done on the Mulesoft side that saves, a Salesforce admin from having to even worry with. So how do we get this authentication? You've got to have, of course, some type of authentication and securing that endpoint. So that's where we lead in on the Mulesoft side. What is the Okta Dance? Let's talk about dancing here. So we have a situation where we have a client app, and this client app is wanting to communicate. In this case, it's a Metrics Toolkit API. So another API that is secure, and so, or I should say, we're wanting to secure it. It's not been secured yet, and so we can use an OAuth provider like Okta. And in addition, when we're managing it on the Anypoint platform, we're going to be using the access token enforcement through the API manager on Anypoint platform. And I'm going to walk you through and show you some of the details on this. We've specifically used the policy of the OpenID Connect Access Token Enforcement, which is that bearer token. So as we go through that first step, the client sends in a request and they've got to get that bearer token. They've got to have that bearer token before they can move forward. And once they have gotten that, then they can go the next step, and it actually validates against the token. And as it validates against that token, then in turn, they will have access to the API. So this is what and that bearer token has a time to live. You can set it at different time frames as far as that's concerned. But this is the security measures, and it obscures having a username and password type of thing. It's, it prevents that from having to be exposed. And so that's the beauty of having, a bearer token and this level of security. So it all begins with getting that bearer token. And this is what that bearer token looks like as we get this data. And then we can in turn use that to access the endpoint. But how do we do that? Where does it start? We have to provide we have to configure a client provider on the Mulesoft platform. Okay. In access management, we go in there and we have to configure this. Well, where do we get the data for this? We ultimately want to use this policy on that API. But at this point, we are not configured on the platform. So what is OAuth 2.0? What are these components we're talking about? So client, as I mentioned, is someone that's wanting to request some information, some data. There's a resource server. And that's the API or application that has the data that the client wants, that they want that data. So the resource owner is the owner of the data of that server. So if you're like a Facebook profile, you're the owner of that. But the authorization server is the one that's going to manage that access and kind of like the bouncer at the door, say whether or not that you're going to, gain access and be approved. Okay. So this starts off at going to Okta. And so we go into Okta, we create a developer account there. And let me stop there, actually. Let me back up and let me go to Okta. If there's any questions along the way, someone please manage the chat and let me know if there's questions along the way there, okay? Sound like a plan? Okay, so here is Okta, developer.okta.com. You'll create and sign up for an account. Now I have one, so I'm not going to go back through the signing up of, but once you're in here and you are established with an account, then our next steps are to actually go through, we'll hit the security tab on the left. And in the security tab, then we're going to come down to the API here. Okay, so this is that authorization server. This is going to be the server that I use. And so you have to go with the information that we need to gather for Anypoint Platform. Let me find it here. I thought I logged in. Let me log in real quick. On Anypoint Platform, we need to have some of the details of many of the URLs that this authorization server uses. So where do we find that? How can we find this information? And the in access management client provider here, if I want to add a client provider, I've got it configured, but I'm going to show you, I need all this information. I need the client registration URL. I need token introspection client ID and secret. I need an authorization. I need all this information. And this is where it gets very complex for a lot of people. And it was for me that there were not real good, clear instructions on some of this. So I had to kind of like go, okay, how do I get this done and make it meaningful? Do the dance, but make it look like it's fun, right? So to make it look like it's fun, I had to get those URLs, and you get them by going to the edit icon here. And there's some metadata here. All right, so when you click on this metadata, you get all of the details here. That's not real pretty. But if I launch into this and prettify it a little bit, what it ends up looking like is, let me make sure this is secure. I've got some other data on this. Bringing it into Notepad++, I now can see, okay, my issuer URL, authorization endpoint, this is where you're going to get the goods. This is where I'm going to go get that token. There's my bearer token URL right there. I need that. I need that. And so as I go down and decipher, what we need, there's another one down below, a little bit lower also, of the actual address to interact and do that dance you saw at the very beginning, the valid, get the token and then the validation. So anyway, we head in that direction and do that and capture all that data. And once we have all that data, then we also need to go into creating, let me see, under our server, our tokens. Okay, so now we need to also have a token manager. See, it's very complex. It's almost like, you can have everything you need to go to the dance and be ready to perform, but man, you got to have the right shoes, you got to have the right outfit, there's all these other things you need. So for completing with or going with the parallel of the dancing, you got to have the token. If you don't have the token, you're not going to be able to authenticate. So we set up a token and get the details on the token and everything we need there. And then we've got to set some scopes and go into the server itself. And that would be where we would set scopes through here. and you'll find a Mule Okta scope with, it's got a special tag name there. You're going to see that when we request the bearer token, because that scope is our scope that we're going to use. So again, detailed stuff here. The next place we go to is creating an application that manages all of this. And in the applications, we have, in this case, the token introspection. There's a couple here that I've set up, but the token introspection is the one that I believe I used on this one account. And this is where you'll end up with a client ID and client secret to work with for your configuration. So all of this stuff comes together, and it comes together in a way in which we can start pulling all of it towards configuring what we need on the platform. Okay, so in this case, I have recommended people get a trial account. It does work to set up a trial account to get all the values added here. So the other thing we did to set up the trial account is I've got a couple of different line of businesses, and I'm going to show you how you can have this feature added just to one environment or multiple environments. So however you want to do that, you can do all of that. Now, here's where it gets a little sketchy. Okay, I'm just going to tell you, this is like the lift and the dance. You're coming to that point and you've got to get it right, because if you mess any bit of this up, it's not going to happen. All right, so here's what we do. We take the detailed information from the Mulesoft page and import this data that we got from Okta. Okay, here's how it works. This is the dance. Name and description, you can make that up. That's fine. Issuer has to be that field. Client registration has to be that one. Authenticate or authorization header must be unique. It must have a certain format there. And the bottom line is all of the data has to be accurate. Then we go to the next bottom part of the sheet and we go into the introspection client. Details here are that the values, again, client ID and client secret, are actually from what we extracted from Okta. And then all of these URLs are also making sense, the token, authorized, and introspection. Okay, so all of that, again, steps of a dance. They've got to be where they need to be. They've got to be accurate. So once you have all of that set up on, oh yeah, the introspection. Sorry, that one is buried down in the metadata, so you have to dig for that one a little bit. But once this is all done, then you can save it, and this part is complete. Okay, this part is complete on the platform. And then what we do, let me go to the account that I have set up here that already has this. Okay. And provider too. Yeah, this one. And if you'll notice, this one has been, completed. This is the one I have in use right now. And on the right-hand side, I can click on the view list and see what environments on my platform account that I have associated to use this the authentication for this. So as I am utilizing, I have identified that I want it to be environment test, the OIDC, that's the acronyms for this type of configuration, and it's a sandbox type. So if I look at the provider, now it's going to give some information, but not all. But this is, has been completed with all this. Once you save it, it's available to use. So for my environments, once I go into that given environment, I can see that where I've associated that particular environment with this protocol, with this provider, the client provider here. Whereas some of the others, I have some purposely no provider, and I would still be able to use, another type of measure, a client provider. Like if none is selected, Anypoint will remain as the client provider, which would be our client ID and client secret through Anypoint Platform as an Anypoint provider. So that is still another way to secure your APIs. However, we can see specifically that this one has been selected as the Mule provider. So from here, then what we do, once we've assigned the environment, as you see. Then the next thing, that portion's complete. That is solid. The next step is to have an API that comes in as a specification. And then from there, we publish it to Exchange. I'm going to walk you through some of that. Add an implementation to it that it is associated with, and then deploy it all to Cloud Hub. So it's publicly accessible, but it is unsecured at first. And then we secure it with the policy. Now, this one's using the Metrics Toolkit API as an example. We're going to use one that's a patient API and secure that with the policies. So we'll go in and secure, make a proxy for it, secure it with OAuth, and then that will be what you have to use going forward to access that endpoint, to access that API. So let me walk you through some of that life cycle from the beginning here. So we'll go into Design Center. Let me make sure I'm in the right place. I've got some other details there. 1 second. There we go. Okay. So this is the EMS Patient System API, and we start in Design Center coding out the endpoint. So that's why I say when it ends up in Salesforce and you don't have to go through all this again, yay, that's great, because we have to go through the process. We've determined what the endpoint is here. We determine what query parameters are, possible. They may not be required, but possible. And this particular system API has got a get patients option, also a post patients, a get by ID, a particular ID, and a put, or if you will, an update for a patient record, and then also to delete. So all of this code, this is in RAML, by the way, if you're not familiar with this coding. And so all of this is part of what we call the specifications or the rules of engagement. Okay. And then from here, what we do is we publish it to Exchange. So it's already published to Exchange. And so I'll hop over into Exchange and grab this one. And, I've documented it where people can see what it does and the details of it. But people can come over here and actually test out against a mocking service, to test out their endpoint and see how that works if they would like to. And it'll give them example data at that point. But we in turn then took this and brought the specification into Studio. Now I don't have Studio up, so I apologize in not being able to share with you the application itself. Do I? No, I don't. But at any rate, then you write the backend code that actually does connect to the database. And when it does connect to the database, yeah, that's fine with me, Melissa. I thought there was a question. Then it does connect to the, a live database, and it's really getting patient information, faux patient. It's not real patient data. Are you kidding? I'm HIPAA compliant. So it's not real information, but it's, our practice, example application that we use. Once that is completed, then we go ahead and we deploy that app to Cloud Hub. I mean, you can deploy it to wherever your Mule runtime is, but for the sake of keeping it simple here, we deployed that app to Cloud Hub. So this one's the actual app that's running, and that's what would be there at first, was just this Mule app. Okay. And so when I run this Mule app and I can check out the logs, I can see now normally you wouldn't have patient data in a log. I do it as an example to show you how it's actually working. But for real, this would not be here. So at any rate, this is the actual log. It's, or I'm sorry, actually the application that's really working and pulling in the live data. Well, we want to secure it because at first this is not secured at all. So to secure it is where we go to API Manager. Now in API Manager, this is where we had to have our client provider defined before we could use that as one of the policies. And so we did, okay, and there's a process here to go through and That's interesting. Oh, I know what that is now. I see runtime channel. This is a new feature. I won't go there right now, but I'm wondering, what is that? So anyway, we come through and we manage the API and we set all this up and we configure all of this. And once we have it as a managed asset, then we can add policies to it. Okay. And so this is the policy category. And the OpenID Connect Access Token is a policy, but let me show you all of the other policies available here as well. These are out of the box policies that you can use to secure your APIs. Or to do whatever you need to do. In some cases, it might be caching or rate limiting, or, there's a whole secure section here. If I wanted to protect an incoming post body, I can have JSON threat protection, IP allow list, block list, all these different things, depending on what you wanted to use and what you needed. And you can stack them. You can put a couple different ones that do different things. But in our case, once you have added the client provider like we did, then we're able to even see the OpenID Connect Access Token. Okay, it wouldn't have been there before. So it must be, you must have it configured correctly, which that can be a challenge, to, have it completed out and be able to utilize it. So we did, and we added this policy, and let me go to the policies. It's pretty simple as far as that's concerned. If I in turn want to edit that configuration to show you, it says what scopes. I could be very specific on the scope. Remember in the Okta, I said you could define a scope. We could be very specific. But anyway, there's a couple configurations here I won't dive deeper into, but this is identifying that the policy has been added and has been applied. And when you do that, once we ended up managing this and adding this element of a managed API, in this case, we chose to use a separate application that is our proxy. So it's a proxy separate app that is handling the, I guess you could say, is sitting in front of our app. And one way that you can see it is here in settings. If you look at the configuration details, this is a good example of how this particular one is set up. There's another way you can do it. It's considered to be basic endpoint, and it's part of your application, but this is a separate, so this has two applications. One's a proxy, one's our real deal. Okay, and so anyway, you can kind of get an idea of some of the construction as far as that's concerned. But once this is done and secured, now if I try to access, let me see, I have got my dog is now wanting some attention. Hold on. Now, if I were to try to go to our proxy, I think it's going to work because my token is good right now. But anyway, let's see if it's going to work. I'm going to click on a get request. I'm going to click on a get request here for that endpoint. Now, where this is coming from is coming from this proxy URL. This is the proxy URL in Cloud Hub. And so I'm using that endpoint. And also another way of locating, gee, what are the public endpoints for some of these assets? You can go to API instances in Exchange and also find the endpoint, which is here the public endpoint for this. So to bring us back over here. Yep, go ahead. Anyone have a question? Nada? Okay. So I have a bearer token. I'm kind of wondering if it's going to let it work or not. I'll tell you what, if I break it, let me break it here. I will not have a bearer token. And I send in a request. It's going to come back with error token has been revoked. That's good. Okay, because so see what I picked up earlier before we started to test it out, it's expired. Okay, so if I try to hit this endpoint, it's secure. And even if, as I'm working with it, I need to get a new token. So remember, in our dance, I've got to get a new token. I've got to go out there and get a new token. So that's what I'm doing now. and that comes in the form of a post. Okay. And so this post, you have to, have the headers. Let me clear this cookie here. Okay, you have to have a header here. You also have the authorization, basic authorization with your client ID and client secret that actually comes from, I left out a piece, comes back from Exchange. Let me show you where that part is. I don't want to miss that. That's a critical part. Whoops. We don't want to miss out on a critical part here. Okay, so back here, now that this is secured, if someone wants to have access to this endpoint, they have to request access. Okay. And so you would go to the request access and choose the environment that it is in, create it's called an application, but it's really like a relationship or a contract between you and the API or whomever is going to be using that. And so this actually is this one. And then when you do, you click on the request access and yeah, let's see. That one too. Okay, so I'm going to create a new one. They're telling me it already exists. So this is going to be a brand new one. Okay, so I'm going to say this is my EMS access contract. All right, and it's going to be authorization code grant and also client credentials grant. And this needs to also be filled out for a redirect. We don't actually even use that, but we'll click on create here. And now what it's going to do when I request access is give me a client ID and client secret to use on this account, So this is what you would have to have, and that's what this is here, client ID and client secret. And so I'm going to go ahead and request from Okta my authentication, my token server. So if you'll notice, the URL up here is the token. And I'm telling it here in these query parameters. So here's a URL. That's going to Okta. I'm going to request a token. The question mark means it's a, oh, that's good. The question mark means that it is a query parameter. And the query parameter, I can show you a little bit differently here because it breaks it down. I'm telling it that scope, my scope that I set up in Okta, and the grant type is based on client credentials. So as I do this and send this in, I should get back a brand new bearer token. Okay, so here's my bearer token. And I copy this bearer token here. Of course, you would have this automated. We're showing it here step by step. So academia, the academia kicks in and you understand the how and why it's working. But I'm going to go back to this original GET request that says your token's been revoked. And I paste in that token. And now you are so mean. Hold on a minute. Let me clear the cookies. There we go. Now let's try it. Oh, header. That's why. I thought I cleared it. Okay. It's live, so it's going to mess up. And voila, we're in. We get data. So we had to go get that bearer token first. Then we turn around, we come back through, and we're able to interact now with the actual database, with the actual live data. So to utilize this is part of that dance that makes securing your APIs seamless. And so as we are, integrating between different platforms, like I showed you on the Salesforce side, and we want to set up a relationship where this API could then in turn interact with the Salesforce platform. Salesforce platform has that bearer token as one of the options. And you saw that it's actually part of the original connection there for Mulesoft services. This Anypoint interaction, that's the login to Anypoint. And then I will be bringing that particular API that you saw into as an imported Mulesoft service, and therefore could be used inside of our flows. So if I switch over to flows, I can show you where some of the flows that are out here as part of the hyperautomation class. Let me see, are part of, I think it is going to be case parts flow, maybe, where we actually bring in, we get promotions here. And this is actually one of the endpoints in that API on Mulesoft side. Okay. And so it gets the promotion parts by code. I wonder if I can, I won't go into it, but I was going to say, it's kind of cool when you run an interview of this, because you see the data coming back in from Mulesoft side, and it's Mulesoft. And so if we look in the toolkit over here too, these Apex defined variables, not that one, wait a minute. It is actually the parts. This one, I believe it is pulling from the external service that's the Mulesoft API. Isn't that the coolest thing? So as we're working with all of this and we're going through the steps of bringing our worlds together in theory between Salesforce and Mulesoft, our platforms are coming together and integrating together. And to me, that's pretty exciting. That's pretty exciting to see, how all this works and where it ends up and how it makes people's lives a lot easier to streamline all of this. Because when it comes to hyperautomation, when it comes to integrating, it's all about making our lives more streamlined with automations but yet secure. We've got to have that security element there. And OAuth 2.0 is highly secure. So that's absolutely one way to make it all happen safely. So, ta-da! That's our dance. Any questions?
This is great. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you so much. This was awesome.
Good.
I do have some questions.
Yeah.
Can you go back to your screen where you showed the Mulesoft services from Salesforce, where you had all your named credentials?
Yes. Now this is let me see. I can go up to here.
There you go.
Yeah.
You also had the services. Yeah, the services page. Thank you. So I get to see the screen. How do I get to see the screen? That should be my question.
How do you get to here? How do you get to here? Let me log in. Okay.
What license do I need to see the screen?
I am not sure.
Just Mulesoft Composer is good enough, or do I need any special Mulesoft license?
What you want to do is click on Setup, go into Setup. Okay, and my trial account has it. This is a regular account, but a trial account does have it because I checked. And then you go to the quick find and you do Mulesoft, type Mulesoft up here, and you'll see Mulesoft services.
Okay.
And once you're in there, now we've already logged in. Let me see if I can go to my other account. Or I could just go and do a trial account real quick.
No, that's okay. That's fine. Let me try that out. Thank you.
Yeah.
So the other question I had is this. What are the related connected app settings that you have to do from Salesforce? Because I see that you did the OpenAD Connect part, the Okta part, the MuleSoft part. Are there anything related to connected app for this?
For this part, when we did named credentials, we started off, see, when you log in and connect Salesforce to MuleSoft, automatically several things happen that you don't have to.
I think it doesn't necessitate the connected app. because you're
Right.
going through that API gateway, you have your dynamic client registration, and you're requesting access. Anybody who needs access does that dynamically, and it is coming through the API gateway. So we have the dynamic client registration and the client credentials as well. Client
Yes.
credentials workflow, because you're not going by the username password, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So that's the thing I was wondering, because Connected App has similar set of credentials, right? Your scopes, your callback URL, and all that you have, everything that you need for your OpenID Connect is also available there. So I was wondering, if you will have that component as well.
Yeah. There are some things like in this case, in the Connected App, like what you're saying,
Right.
we have already connected Salesforce, but it was for another reason. And we didn't necessarily need to do it. All of that other, the name credential and all of that, named,
Name
Name
credentials.
credentials.
yeah, name credentials and external credentials. That's what I was trying. So
Okay.
these,
are the only ones that you can
are the ones that are doing it. Yes.
Yeah.
So
yes.
I can explain this really quick. The named credentials are for Salesforce calling out to MuleSoft. The connected app would be for MuleSoft calling into Salesforce. So Salesforce calling into MuleSoft, that's why you have the connected app on the MuleSoft side. If MuleSoft is calling Salesforce, you're going to have the connected app on the Salesforce side.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Makes sense?
That explains.
Yes. Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah. But some things occur when you do the login, that happen automatically. And
yeah,
then
through the flow. Yeah.
Then when you bring a MuleSoft app in, and we are bringing that MuleSoft app in the services, you have to do it manually. You have to do it manually. Let me show you, see if I can find it fast enough. The steps on the, I have a good layout of the design on that. 1 second. Yeah. And not finding it fast enough. Okay. Well, if I could find it fast enough, that would be great, but I'm not seeing it quick enough to be able to share here on the fly. But I have the where it's mapped out pretty easy to understand, but because there's the 3 parts that you have to go through to get a MuleSoft app into Salesforce would be the steps of the credential portion. So you have to go through, let me go back to the named, because that's where it starts. You have to go in and do the external credentials first. So I'd have to come in here just like we did with basic auth. We'd have to create that first. And then you go back to the name credentials, and you can use it and bring in your, whatever the authentication is that you define. Like we've got basic authentication there, and then reach out to that Mule app and then do the permissions. So once you do those components, the Mule app then becomes something, like I said, reusable and flow. Yeah. So there's some pieces to it as far as that's concerned.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really cool. And I understand they're doing more to streamline the connections between them all as well, which, is pretty exciting.
Really cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think being able to use MuleSoft and Flow is pretty cool.
Yeah, it really is. And to see it, be there.
Yeah.
That's a Mule thing. Yeah.
I didn't know how to set that up, so now I know.
Well, and I'll be glad to go through it more clarity too. I've got it on a presentation because I did a recent, actually it was a hyper automation exam prep session for some of the students in my classes. And I mapped it out because, we try to explain it in a way that it's meaningful. And really, Melissa, what you said is awesome, because that really helps to, give some clarity on what happens from one side to the other. If you're initiating versus receiving, that's really helpful.
Yep. And then there's also like, you know, which system enforces mutual TLS and things like that. And it all depends on which system's calling which. So like you enforce it on the Salesforce side, you can also you have to also enforce it on the Mulesoft side. So when Salesforce calls Mulesoft, and then enforce it on the Salesforce side when Mulesoft when I just got confused. Salesforce
You know,
calls
it's weird. I
Mulesoft.
understood.
Yeah, you enforce it on the Mulesoft side. When Mulesoft calls Salesforce, you enforce it on the Salesforce side. These are all things, you know, like going through CT, you gotta know this stuff inside and out. So
Yeah.
and be able to explain it.
Right, right. Well, it is true. And even like with, you know, what was mentioned too of, the external access, some of that, is more Mule though. Connected apps more when we go into here and we're looking at the scopes, you know, all of the provisions and, you know, so yeah, you've got to kind of get that relationship and that trust and add the scopes and, you know, from this side and likewise, you know, the other direction too. But once that's been met and, you know, streamlined and brought them all together, then, you know, the rest of it just brings it. It's the benefit of the integrations. You know, we really see the benefit of the integrations there. So cool. Any other questions? Awesome. All right. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you for presenting.
Yeah, always fun. Always fun.